In my 40 years on the bench, I've seen defendants come in wearing fear, remorse, and sometimes pure defiance. But this case, this young man walked into my courtroom wearing something worse, contempt. He didn't just argue. He mocked working people, insulted the process, and then crossed a line that no court can ignore. When he spat toward the bench and said, "I don't speak minimum wage," I had to take a breath and remind myself, my job isn't to react, it's to teach and to protect. When this case landed on my desk, it arrived with a file that made me pause before I even opened it. The charge list wasn't long, but it was serious. Disorderly conduct, contempt-related courtroom behavior, and an allegation of assaultive conduct connected to an incident inside the courthouse. The defendant was a young man in his early 20s, identified as the son of a sitting senator. I've learned over the decades that political power can affect people in two different ways. For some, it creates a deep sense of responsibility. For others, it creates a dangerous belief that rules are optional. The victim in this matter wasn't a stranger on the street. It was a court employee, one of the people who keeps the system running. And I want to say this clearly. Court staff, clerks, officers, bailiffs are not background characters. They are the backbone of justice. They show up every day to serve people they don't know in moments that are often the worst days of those people's lives. I reviewed the incident report, I looked at the courtroom security notes, and I watched the internal hallway footage. What concerned me most was not only the disrespect, it was the escalation. There were multiple moments where this young man could have stopped, calmed down, and chosen dignity. Instead, he chose to perform arrogance. And I remember thinking, Frank, this will be a test, not of your authority, but of whether the courtroom can still command basic respect. Here's what happened that day, based on the evidence I reviewed. According to witnesses, the defendant arrived at court for a routine matter, something that should have been handled with a calm conversation. But he came in late and already irritated. The reports described him pacing, talking loudly on his phone, and arguing with staff about paperwork. A clerk asked him to lower his voice. A court officer asked him to step back from the counter so other people could be helped. And this is important. These were not unreasonable demands. This wasn't anyone targeting him. It was normal courthouse order. Instead of complying, he allegedly leaned toward the clerk and said, "Do you know who my father is?" Now, I've heard that line more times than I can count, and I've also seen how it's usually used, not as information, but as a weapon. It's meant to intimidate someone who's just trying to do their job. The situation escalated when he was told he'd need to wait his turn, like everyone else. The reports say he laughed and made a comment about the line being full of people who can't afford real lawyers. Then came the remark that spread like wildfire later, "I don't speak minimum wage." Let me tell you, when I read that, I felt more sadness than anger, because anyone who thinks work is something to mock doesn't understand life. They don't understand their own good fortune, and they don't understand the dignity of other people. According to the officer's report, the defendant then tried to push past a secured doorway leading toward the courtroom hallway. The officer stepped into his path, no force, no aggression, just a clear barrier, and instructed him to stop. And here is the part that changed everything. Witnesses stated the defendant turned toward the bench area where I was seated, and during an exchange where he was being instructed to calm down, he spit in my direction. The spit did not land on me, but it landed near the front of the bench. That matters, not because of my pride, but because of what it represents. Spitting isn't just disrespect. It's an act meant to degrade. It's meant to say, "You are beneath me." When I watched the footage and read the statements, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I've dealt with anger. I've dealt with tears. I've even dealt with shouting, but spitting in a courtroom is a deliberate decision to violate the space where we settle disputes peacefully. And once someone chooses that, the court has to respond in a way that protects everyone in the room, especially the staff and the public. As I continued reviewing the evidence, I focused on consistency and detail. I don't build decisions on rumors. I build them on facts. There were multiple staff statements, each describing the same sequence: refusal to comply, insults directed at working people, threats about influence, and then the spitting incident. The security notes documented the disruption to other cases. People were waiting in the gallery, elderly defendants, parents with kids, forced to sit through a young man's tantrum. I reviewed the hallway video and the bench area angle. The footage didn't show a man being mistreated. It showed a man being given repeated chances to calm down. And what struck me most was how many off-ramps he ignored. A respectful request, then another, then a clear instruction, then a warning. At every step, he chose escalation. The officer's report included a description of how close he came to staff, how he leaned over the counter, how he used his body language to intimidate. That matters to me, because intimidation is a form of violence, even when it doesn't leave a bruise. After the spitting incident, the officers removed him from the immediate area. He continued yelling, according to the reports, insisting that this would disappear. He said words to the effect of, "You're going to regret this." I've been doing this long enough to know something. When someone believes consequences don't apply to them, the court must apply consequences, fairly, firmly, and without apology. By the time this case came to my courtroom for a formal hearing, it had already become a public story. My staff told me clips and comments were circulating online. People were repeating the minimum wage line as a symbol of everything they're tired of. Entitlement, cruelty, the idea that some people live above the rules. I understand why it resonated. A courthouse is one of the last places where people expect equality. So when someone walks into that space and tries to act like royalty, it offends something deep in the public. But here's what I tell people every single time. It doesn't matter if 10 people are watching or 10 million. In my courtroom, everyone gets the same fair process. I don't let viral attention decide guilt. I don't let outrage decide sentencing. I focus on what happened, what the law allows, and what justice requires. Still, I'll admit something to you. Cases like this test the public's faith. People wonder whether power will win. They wonder whether a famous last name will soften accountability. And my responsibility as a judge is to make sure the answer is no, not because I'm trying to make a point, but because that's what the law is supposed to be, a level ground. When the defendant walked into my courtroom on the hearing date, I noticed his confidence immediately. He wasn't trembling. He wasn't quiet. He walked in like he was entering a boardroom he owned. He was dressed sharply, designer suit, expensive watch, hair perfectly done. His attorney walked beside him, calm and professional, but I could sense tension in the way the attorney kept glancing over, as if trying to manage a client who doesn't like being managed. The courtroom was fuller than usual. There were court employees in the back, not there to gawk, but because the case involved one of their own. There were members of the public too, working people, retirees, some veterans. You could feel that everyone wanted to know, would the court protect its dignity? I looked down at the file, then back up at him. I said, "Good morning, sir. Step forward and state your name for the record." He stated it quickly. I said, "You're here because of allegations involving disorderly conduct and contemptuous behavior in this courthouse. Do you understand why you're here?" He smirked slightly and said, "Yeah, because people here can't take a joke." I didn't raise my voice. I never need to. I said, "This is not a comedy club. This is a courthouse." His attorney stood. "Your Honor, if I may, my client understands the seriousness. He's prepared to apologize for any misunderstanding." I nodded. "Counsel, I appreciate that, but I need to hear from him." I turned to the defendant. "Sir, were you told by staff to lower your voice and wait your turn?" He shrugged, actually shrugged, and said, "Probably." I felt my patience tested, but I kept my tone even. Probably is not an answer. In court, we deal in facts. Yes or no? He said, "Yes." I said, "Were you told by a court officer to stop approaching a secured area?" He said, "He blocked me." I shook my head. "He didn't block you. He performed a security function. There's a difference." Then I said, "Did you say the words, 'I don't speak minimum wage' in reference to court staff?" He leaned back slightly and said, "I mean, yeah, it's not that deep." I paused. I looked at him for a long moment. I said, "Let me tell you what's deep. The dignity of work, the dignity of people who serve the public. You don't get to come into a courthouse and treat staff like they're beneath you." He rolled his eyes. I said, "Sir, you can roll your eyes all you want, but the law doesn't blink." At that moment, I asked for the video to be played. We played the courthouse footage. It showed him at the counter, leaning in, gesturing aggressively, pointing. It showed the officer stepping forward, hand up, directing him back. It showed the defendant turning toward the bench area and then the spitting motion. I felt my blood pressure rising, not out of anger, but out of the seriousness of what that act represented. So I took a breath, composed myself. This wasn't about my feelings, it was about justice. I paused the footage. I said, "Sir, did you spit in the direction of the bench?" He laughed quietly and said, "Come on, it didn't even hit you." It didn't. That moment told me everything about his mindset. I leaned forward slightly and said, "Sir, I want you to listen to me carefully. The fact that it didn't land on me does not make it acceptable. Spitting in a courtroom is contempt for the entire system." He started to speak over me. I raised my hand, not in anger, but as a stop sign. "No, you will not speak over me in my courtroom." He sat back, jaw tight. Then my bailiff came to the bench and handed the clerk a note. My clerk leaned in and showed me printed screenshots, messages, and posts. They had been provided to the court because they were time-stamped during the pendency of the proceedings. I looked at them carefully, and I felt that familiar disappointment again. I said, "Sir, did you post about these proceedings on Snapchat?" He said, "Yeah, everyone does." I said, "I'm not asking about everyone, I'm asking about you." He said, "Yes." I held up the printout. "The post attributed to you says, 'Caprio is so dramatic. This is literally nothing.' Did you write that?" He smirked. "It's true." I looked at him for a long moment, slow, quiet, letting the silence do the work. I said, "Let me tell you what's not nothing. The rule of law is not nothing. The dignity of this courthouse is not nothing. The people who come in here terrified, hoping the system will protect them, that is not nothing." He muttered something under his breath. I said, "Speak up, sir." He said, "I said this is a waste of time. My dad's going to handle it." I nodded slowly. "No, your father has nothing to do with this courtroom. In here, you are not a senator's son. You are a defendant like anyone else." His attorney shifted, clearly uncomfortable. I turned to the clerk and said, "Call the victim, court staff member, to speak." A court clerk who had been at the counter that day stood up. She looked nervous, not because she was afraid of the court, because she was afraid of being mocked again. I said gently, "Take your time." She described him leaning over the counter, making her feel small, calling her help, and laughing when she asked him to wait. I looked at the defendant and said, "Do you deny that you treated her that way?" He said, "She was being slow." I shook my head. She was doing her job. Then I addressed him directly. "Sir, I've been patient with a lot of defendants. I've listened to excuses, explanations, and apologies. But what I cannot accept is cruelty, especially cruelty aimed at working people who can't fight back." I paused. "You think saying minimum wage is an insult. Let me tell you something. Honest work is never an insult. Honest work is honorable." The gallery was silent. Then I turned to him again. "You're going to have a chance to show me you understand, right now. Do you want to apologize to the clerk and the court officer?" He hesitated. His pride fought with the reality of where he was. He finally said, "I'm sorry if they got offended." I shook my head. "No, that's not an apology. That's blame in a tuxedo." His attorney whispered to him. The defendant's face tightened. Then he said, quieter, "I'm sorry I said it. I'm sorry I acted like that." I nodded. "That's closer." Then I asked him the question I ask when I'm trying to reach someone's conscience. I said, "Sir, do you think your father's position makes you better than the clerk who helped you?" He looked down for a moment. He said, "No." I said, "Then act like it, because right now your actions say the opposite." At that point, I had to decide what to do. I had to weigh accountability, deterrence, and rehabilitation. I had to consider that he was young, and youth can change. But I also had to consider that if the court tolerates spitting and contempt, it invites worse the next time. And I knew the lesson had to be firm. I've been on this bench long enough to know that consequences must be clear when the offense strikes at the heart of public order. I looked at him and said, "Sir, I want you to understand something." I paused. "I've been a judge for 40 years. I've seen thousands of defendants. Some are remorseful. Some are scared. Some genuinely made mistakes." I paused again. "But you walked into this courthouse and treated working people like they were beneath you. You mocked them. You tried to intimidate them. And then you spit in the direction of the bench." I leaned forward. "You posted on Snapchat during these proceedings that I'm dramatic, that this is literally nothing." I let the silence hang. "Let me tell you what's not nothing. The rule of law is not nothing. The dignity of court staff is not nothing. The safety of the public in this building is not nothing." Then I explained the sentence as a teaching moment, not a spectacle. I said, "Here's what I'm ordering. First, you are found in contempt for your courtroom conduct, and I'm imposing a maximum permissible sanction within this court's authority for that contempt. Second, on the underlying charges, you will receive a sentence consistent with the statutory limits and the facts, one that includes a period of custody where appropriate, followed by supervised probation. Third, you will complete anger management and a respect and accountability program approved by probation. I want proof of completion. Fourth, you will perform community service in a setting that serves working people and vulnerable populations, approved by probation, so you can experience what it means to show up, be humble, and serve." Then I looked at him and said something I meant with all my heart. "Sir, privilege is not a crime, but using privilege as a weapon is." I continued, "I hope you use this time to think about who you want to be, because right now, the person I see in front of me, arrogant, dismissive, cruel, that's not who you should be." And then I said the moral statement I wanted him to carry. Respect is not something you demand from others. Respect is something you demonstrate, especially when you think you don't have to. After I delivered the sentence, the courtroom went quiet in that particular way it does when reality settles in. The defendant's confidence drained, his shoulders dropped. His attorney leaned in and spoke softly to him. For the first time, I saw something human in his expression, fear. Not fear of me, fear of consequence. Court staff looked relieved, not because they wanted him harmed, but because they wanted protection. They wanted reassurance that the courthouse is not a place where you can humiliate people for sport. After I adjourned, the clerk approached me. She didn't celebrate. She simply said, "Thank you, Your Honor." I told her, "Thank you for doing your job with professionalism. You didn't deserve what happened." Later that week, my staff told me the ruling was spreading online too. People were saying, "Finally, someone held him accountable." Some said it was too harsh. Some said it wasn't harsh enough. But I told my clerk what I've always believed. I didn't do this for the internet. I did it because a courthouse must remain a place where every person, rich or poor, powerful or unknown, stands equal. As for the defendant, I hope the sentence would do what a good sentence should do: interrupt a harmful pattern, humble him, give him a chance to rebuild his character before life delivers a harsher correction. Because the goal is not to break people. The goal is to wake them up. Let me tell you what I hope people learn from this case. First, there is no such thing as small disrespect when it's aimed at the people who keep society running. Clerks, court officers, janitors, cashiers, these are human beings with dignity, families, and pride in their work. Second, social media can make people reckless. It can turn a serious moment into a joke, a caption, a performance. But consequences don't disappear because you posted a laugh emoji. Real life still shows up. And finally, accountability matters. In my courtroom, I don't care who your father is, how important your name is, or what kind of connections you think you have. What matters is what you did, and whether you're willing to own it. After 40 years on the bench, I still believe this. Respect isn't optional. Accountability isn't negotiable. And the courtroom must always stand for both.